Ichigo Kurosaki has been acting as a Soul Reaper for several months now. But how much longer can his secret last? It seems inevitable that his friends will discover the truth, and more concerningly, new enemies will too. In volumes 4, 5, and 6, Bleach's world gets bigger, raising questions about friendship, heritage, and the balance between good and evil. Today on Truth, Beauty, Comics. Welcome to Truth, Beauty, Comics. I'm Levi, a cartoonist.
And I'm Felix, a guy who likes comics.
And this is the podcast where we look for transcendence in a pulpy medium. Today we'll be talking about volumes 4, 5, and hopefully 6 of Bleach, kind of continuing our series on this manga. Picking it up. I think last time it's been, a little while since we've talked, hasn't it, Felix? We've had
Christmas,
a nice holiday break
and all. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so it feels good to be back with a familiar cast of characters, and So I guess my question would be, this feels like a transitional volume a little bit to me. Having read quite a bit further, I'm sitting here out at my desk looking at like a stack of Bleach manga that's about as long as my arm, or maybe even longer. So I've read quite a bit further now, and honestly, revisiting this one, I'd forgotten a lot that was in here.
Yeah.
So it does feel a little transitional, but not a bad one. I don't know. What are your thoughts on I guess we got 4, 5, and 6 here, kind of where this falls in the story.
Yeah, I agree. They are sort of transitional. There's sort of an historical reason for that, because as I understand it, Tite Kubo, the author, initially planned Bleach to be maybe about 6 volumes, but it was proving a lot more popular than his previous manga, Zombie Powder, which was canceled only 4 volumes in. And so he started really thinking more about Bleach's world and sort of long-term storytelling possibilities at this point. And I mean, I expect he had certain ideas in the back of his mind, right? We talked, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, about how far in advance he did character design, because he just really enjoys coming up with these different designs for figures who will be in the manga. And like he had, in the first chapter, he has one image of a character, Shinji, who doesn't come in until I think volume 21. So I mean, I think he was thinking a bit ahead, but not nearly as concretely. And I think these volumes are when he really starts to, I guess, kind of set up both Bleach's world and the extended cast a lot more.
Yeah.
Because the first 3, they're really focused on Ichigo, and then a bit on Rukia, Orihime, and Chad. But I don't want to say they're in a stasis, but after the first chapter, things in volumes 1, 2, and 3 are mostly kind of just giving you a sense of this story and pulling you in. Whereas, in these volumes, we get the introduction of the kind of final core member of the human cast, Uryu Ishida. Orihime and Chad develop powers, and we kind of finally start to really understand how it's kind of the mechanisms and some of the metaphysics behind the world building and the idea of souls in the afterlife and the soul society with the introduction of the Quincy's. And that I think really kind of sets the table for, in a couple volumes, when it gets to the Soul Society arc, which is, kind of one of the high watermarks in sort of all the history of shonen manga. And it really does feel like it is transitioning into a bigger world, a bigger story, a more fleshed out cast of characters that can be placed in a lot more situations. Because yeah, I don't know. So that's kind of my initial. It also, volume 5 particularly is one of my favorite volumes in all of Bleach. It's a top 5 volume. I probably read volume 5 of Bleach as a teenager 40 times.
Interesting.
I love that volume. But yeah. So that's kind of my overall.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. I mean, I do like Chad and Orihime, and it seems like that's kind of their. There's a lot going on with them in that volume. I think It's weird. It's weird reading this and then having just kind of finished off. I think I was on to, when I don't even know what the arc is.
Yeah, so
The
the big
arc
one.
after the Soul Society.
Yeah, so the super long one, the longest one in the series is the Aaron Carr arc, and that's volumes
Yes.
21 through I want to say like 44-ish, something like that.
Yeah. So I finished the Aaron Carr arc, and it's interesting to me how many characters I realized picking this back up, like kind of get dropped after this point.
Yeah.
Because he just keeps introducing so many characters, all of which are generally pretty good, but really not a lot of the characters present here that you kind of think that are, kind of the high school cast and the siblings and the family and stuff really get a lot of time after this. And he introduces a whole with the Soul Society and then the Aaron Cars and all this stuff. There's just so many that they just don't really have time for these. So it is.
Yeah.
It's almost like I could see that he was like, probably before this volume came out, he had made the decision to blow this up into a much larger world. But naturally, if this was the end, this would be a good place to start kind of winding stuff down too. So,
Yeah.
I think this is where stuff starts to turn and open up into kind of a bigger world, especially towards the last volume here.
Yeah, and so just to kind of get a little bit nitty-gritty about the sort of whole scale of Bleach. So after the Aaron Carr arc, which I agree, like the Aaron Carr arc has some very high highs, but I think it's also like it's a little less consistent than the first arc, Karakura Town and Soul Society. There's some excellent stuff, and I think the ending, particularly the last few volumes, really strong. There are some very good characters introduced in that arc, but it does sort of it feels a little bloated in a way that the first two arcs, like Soul Society, despite being something like 12 volumes long, has no fat on it. Every single moment it's clear what each character's goal is, why each fight is happening, why each conflict, what the ways that people are working towards it. Aaron Carr arc feels a little bit more one battle after another sometimes. Even though I do like a lot of things about it, and there are some excellent battles in it too. The arc after that is sort of strange. The Fullbring arc, I like it. It's sort of divisive. It has a little bit more time for some of these high school characters, which I appreciate because some of them are ones that I really like. And then there's the sort of final arc, the thousand-year Blood War arc, is generally sort of ranked the second best after Soul Society. It's very popular. The pacing is a little strange, and I think it's hurt a little bit by Kubo. I'm not going to go into any spoilers or anything, but it's hurt a bit by Kubo just being so tired. He's it ends up being 74 volumes over the course of 15 years. Like he's drained. And so there are certain things that just happen too fast, and certain character moments that earlier on in the story I think would have been teased out a bit better. But interestingly, they're finally adapting that final arc to an anime. It's, I think, a 4-season anime. The first 3 are out, and the last one is going to come out. And Kubo, unlike the main anime where Kubo is pretty hands-off, Kubo is super involved in this anime and is not so much changing things as like really shifting the kind of timing and some of the exposition and getting more into some of the character motivations and delving into some of the character moments a bit more deeply. And so this sort of final anime adaptation is massively popular, just hugely beloved.
Okay.
And so I'm intrigued once the last season is out to just watch through the whole thing, because I've heard very good things. And for me, like Kubo, it's funny, right? Because there are mangas where they're really good at character stuff, and there's mangas where it's sort of just fighty fight. And then there's one that can do both. And Kubo is amazing at both, but he often will sort of structure some of the later arcs to like not give enough time for the character stuff that he's really good at. And there'll be some of the best moments, but there'll be, instead of being like 10 really good character moments in a volume, there's one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so
Huh.
let's dive into to volume 4. Do you want
Yeah.
to give the sort of summary for the first story about Don Kanonji? This one's volume 4. I think probably won't have a lot to talk about, so it'll be kind of quick. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, pretty much the majority of Volume 4 is taken up with the story of a TV ghost hunter called Don Kanoji. They call him a spiritualist in this. Now, as I was reading this, I was like, are spiritualists popular? Like they're celebrity spiritualists. But when you call him a ghost hunter, I'm like, wait a second. No, actually, ghost hunters are very popular. So that kind of makes sense. So they, Ichigo's like the only one who thinks this guy's a fraud, but everyone else is really into him. They do this kind of like move, like boo ha ha. That's his like trademark thing, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of funny. But they go to a friend, attend a live taping of the show, dragging Ichigo along reluctantly. While there, a hollow appears, and Ichigo's forced into battle. Some of Ichigo's loved ones seem to be able to perceive Ichigo, even when he's in his spirit form, and so it seems like his spiritual abilities are developing. But kind of it's a fairly comical volume. There's not a lot of peril. Don Kanoji's shifts between like funny and kind of annoying. Really he's getting in the way most of the time while protect not assuming he's mentoring Ichigo kind of in his spiritual ghost hunting. Yeah, kind of a light volume, kind of fun. But what do you think of this one?
yeah, I really
Felix?
like this story, but it is, there's not a lot of meat on it. There is a sort of there's some nice character moments, like when Don Kanonji realizes that he hasn't actually been like helping the spirits pass on. He's been turning them into hollows. And he has this kind of crisis of conscience that I think is well done. There's some good action. There's a nice sort of closing moment where Ichigo, despite his reluctance and general sort of sardonic nature, encourages Don Kanonji to kind of continue his work, though a bit differently, and continue to stand as a kind of hero to the millions of people who watch him every week. Yeah, so I like this quite a bit, but I don't really have kind of that much to say about it. What about you?
I agree with that. I don't think there's a lot to it. I do think this is kind of a volume that showcases Tite Kubo's kind of comedic
Yeah,
abilities pretty well. There's a few transitions with the panels that just make me laugh.
yeah,
There's one where finally Ichigo's been Don Kanoji has been getting in the way constantly, and Ichigo finally gets this hollow alone on the roof. And he's like, I had to protect Kanoji, so I couldn't really fight. But now that he's not here, you're toast, So it's this moment. And then, bam, he shows up. Sorry to keep you waiting, boy. And then he's like, and by the way, I can barely stand.
yeah,
So he's like, "Why'd you come up then?" So it's pretty funny, and he can draw a comedic character really well. So
yeah.
some of these are just it's just light reading. It's fun, and I think there's an interesting thing that happens in Bleach where you do popularity. He does popularity polls apparently of the
Yeah,
fans.
because it was published chapter by chapter in Weekly Shonen Jump, and
Okay,
Shonen Jump will have for their more popular sort of character or story series, they'll run these annual popularity polls, and so like each year as you go through, you can sort of track how popular various characters are.
yeah. So Don Kanoji, I don't think was very popular. I think when they publish it, it's like he's toward the bottom. So he doesn't seem to really get a lot of time. He doesn't show much up later in subsequent issues. But as far as like a
Yeah.
little diversion, he's fun.
Yeah, so towards the end of the volume, and the sort of one other thing which you mentioned is kind of that this does start to foreshadow what's going to happen in volume 5, as these people in Ichigo's life are starting to be able to perceive him in his spirit form, and kind of that starts to raise questions. But yeah, so towards the end of the volume, there's a new character introduced, and this is where we start to get kind of a little bit more meat on the bones. Uryu Ishida. So this enigmatic figure introduces himself to Ichigo, tells him that he hates Soul Reapers, and then kills a hollow in front of him using this giant bow and arrow, seemingly made out of light. And so then that I think is quite effective. And then in the beginning of Volume 5, we sort of find out Uryu is actually in Ichigo's class. He's like head of the sewing club, and there's sort of this great setup with like where in Japan I think it's standard to post people's grades basically and rank the sort of best to worst students in the whole class, and it's in this really large high school. They're all looking at it. Orihime, Chad, Ichigo all do quite well. They're all in the top like 30-ish or something like that, maybe 20. And but then at the very top, Ryu Ishida. So it turns out
Yeah.
he's quite intellectually gifted and dedicated as well. So we come to find out that Uryu is the last of the Quincy's, an ancient order that fought Hollows. Uryu, wishing to prove the superiority of the Quincy's over the Soul Reapers, challenges Ichigo to see who can defeat more Hollows. He releases bait to draw Hollows out, and they come very quickly. Many, many, many of them. So this is just sort of the very beginning of Uryu's character, and he goes on to be developed quite a bit. But yeah, I think this is a really effective introduction. What do you think of this kind of bringing this new character in?
Yeah, well, I noticed that in the little kind of bios that Kubo will do, Uru is a Radiohead Kid A fan, which really I think fits his character very well. And he does seem like the kind of guy who would be super into Kid A. But yeah, I think it's a good introduction. Uru is interesting because I think he's a good kind of. He's not so much a foil for Ichigo, but they are very different. And they get closer. Kind of their motivations kind of get closer as the story goes. But what he does here, how he kind of sets up the situation by creating this contest where he says, okay, let's see who's going to kill more Hollows. Well, Ichigo immediately objects because he's like, people are going to get killed, by you bringing all these Hollows here. And he's like, no, they're not. But really, Ichigo's much more concerned, not so much about is he the best, is he greater than anyone, but just kind of protecting people. And Uro is driven by kind of more of a selfish ambition, or not, maybe not selfish, but he's not necessarily out
more
just to
personal,
protect
sort of.
people. Yeah, it's like a vendetta or something. Yeah, so he's an interesting contrast to Ichigo. And he has a cool weapon. So another good kind of design by
his design.
Kubo.
Yeah, the sort of fashion side of things. We haven't really seen many Soul Reapers. We've just seen Rukia and Ichigo at this point. But part of the kind of brilliance, I think, of Kubo's design is that he understands the manga medium deeply. And manga, famously, is published 99% of the time in black and white. And so he designs the Soul Reaper costume and the Quincy costume to be both immediately recognizable in terms of, the Soul Reaper costume is this deep black with, but then that also allows for a ton of variation and a ton of particular style. And so you can see an image in black and white of one of any myriad Soul Reapers that will come to meet and know immediately who it is, even in a large group. And then similarly with the Quincy getup, it's immediately recognizable, but it also allows for a lot of slight variation that I think works really well.
Yeah. So as far as the Quincy's get,
I was going to say, I want to move on to the Chad stuff, or did you want to say something?
Yeah, let's no, keep going. Let's keep going.
Yeah, okay. So first we'll sort of talk about Chad's story. So volume 5 really shifts most of the focus to the other residents of Karakura Town and the impact that this contest that Uryu puts into practice. So first there's Chad's. So even though he can't see Hollows, he figures out something is going on and tries to help those in danger. He eventually runs into Ichigo's younger sister, Karin, who can see Hollows. And similar to in Volume 2, when Chad and Rukia team up, using Chad's strength and Karin's eyes, the pair begin fighting a massive Hollow. The Hollow then kind of comes upon these 3 kids and Chad has this flashback to himself as a young boy with his grandfather. So Chad had been like picking on another kid, and his I think Mexican grandfather explained to him that he's blessed with strength, height, and good looks, and that using them to hurt others accomplishes nothing. The only proper use of these gifts is to be kind and help others. So Chad thinks to himself, I know, Abuelo, that my big fists aren't for hurting people. They're for protecting my mighty body. I know that now. I've learned my lesson. Please give me that power. Suddenly, Chad's right arm is transformed into a massive metal limb, and Chad is able to see the hollow. He uses his newfound powers to defeat the hollow before fainting. So I love this. I love this vignette. Yeah, what do you think of it?
Yeah, I think well, this is a great arc. It was news to me that Chad was Mexican too, so that was
Yeah,
something.
I know he's Hispanic. I think he's Mexican.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Tite Kubo does seem to like to bring in a lot of like Hispanic stuff, especially with the Aaron Carr arc, where everything's like seeming to use a Spanish name of some kind. But I think this to me is one of the strengths, I think, of manga. When it's especially when it seems to know its audience and aimed at boys, this is a great lesson, right? And this is why it's like, hey, if you're strong, use that strength to help and protect and not to take advantage of people. For boys in particular, is because it's just chock full of like just fundamentally good, solid lessons like this, kind of moral lessons about, because Chad is, a Chad, right? He's someone who's strong, but over and over again, and same with Ichigo too. This is kind of it's just repeated throughout this volume is to use what strength you have, whether it's small or immense, for good, for protecting, not for your own kind of advancement. So I think that's actually a really good lesson for boys. I think they need to see this kind of stuff. I think we used to do kind of better about this, about teaching them to be noble with the talents that they have.
Yeah.
And so simple as it is, I think, whoever 12-year-old boys are simple people, and they need this kind of instruction from what they read. And there's so often, I think just story, the way they try to tell stories today, you don't get like morally simple characters like this, but it's really refreshing to read. And I think that's one of the strengths of the whole series.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think the kind of undergirding moral ideas throughout Bleach, not necessarily the metaphysical ones, but the moral ones, are often really good and really compellingly depicted. Right? There is, even, I mean, there are times when there is kind of difficult. There are like moral quandaries at times, but I think the kind of I think there is a sort of underlying virtue ethics to it that does kind of call the characters to live honorably. And there's even kind of, particularly sort of with the character of Byakuya, who's introduced in a couple volumes, kind of competing notions of honor and sort of figuring out how to adjudicate them and to live well, including in a kind of corrupt system, I think is done in a way that's really impactful, really effective, and like deals with some like complicated issues, but not in a deconstructive way. Because it's because there's a sort of simplicity to it, but it doesn't shy away from kind of complexity. And I think Kubo's just really good at that. One sort of brief note, sorry, and mentioning like the integration of like Mexican and broader Hispanic culture throughout it. So my understanding is that he sort of based each of the sort of societies and style of each of the main kind of groups throughout Bleach off of a different sort of linguistic ethnic group. So the Soul Reapers, unsurprisingly Japanese, right? Like we'll eventually see the Soul Society, but we won't get into that now. But sort of deeply influenced by Japanese culture. The Aaron Cars by Mexican and just or like Mesoamerican. The Fullbringers on English culture. The Quincy's on German. And then has long been speculation that he originally planned to have a Hell arc to close the series. Because we have these sort of little references to Hell throughout, but they're not really developed. And Kubo actually, like maybe 3-4 years ago, published the first chapter, like a super long chapter, like 80 pages or something, of the Hell arc that was just kind of setting things up. Then he got involved, and he said, like, I'm not going to serialize this. I'm going to write it as I write it, like, because I hate serialization. I hate the stress of it. Like, it hurt my health. It hurt my mental, my sanity.
Mm-hmm.
And people have speculated for a long time that Hell is going to be based on French culture, which makes sense.
Nice.
I don't know what sort of pieces of things they're picking that up from, so who knows if that'll be accurate. I really do hope he eventually does the Hell arc, though I do really like the conclusion of the sort of main series. So, we'll see.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, I think there is... Yeah, the sort of integration, like just very sort of lightly throughout of Chad's kind of Mexican heritage, I think also impacts his character in some ways, because there's this sort of implication that part of why Chad and Ichigo initially connected was that, Japan, it might be slightly different now, but, 30 years ago, when Kubo was initially writing, there have been long held sort of prejudices against non-Japanese people in Japan. And Chad is, half Mexican, I think Mexican. I might be wrong. Someone will correct me if I am. But I think half Mexican, half Japanese. And Ichigo, though he is completely Japanese, is a redhead. And so people tended, at least at that time, to think if you're a redhead, either you're not Japanese, and so we don't really want you here, or you dye your hair and are looking for attention, especially in high school.
Right.
And so he would kind of get picked on throughout it. And so they both kind of have that in common, this sort of outsider status. Yeah, from a society that is, at least at the time, again, I don't know that much about Japan in 2026, but was very hesitant about outsiders. And that also, I think, will be kind of reflected in the Soul Society arc in various ways of a teenager kind of confronting this very rigid ancient structure and having to kind of deal with that. I think that's sort of really well handled. But yeah, anything else on sort of Chad's section, or do you want to move on to Orihime?
Yeah, let's talk about Orihime.
All right, you want to start the summary of it?
Sure. Yeah. So Orihime, Tatsuki, and Chizuru, they're waiting outside the school building. And we've kind of seen that Tatsuki has begun to see ghosts kind of more clearly. So she has spiritual powers as well. But a hollow shows up, lured by Uru's bait, and destroys a bunch of windows. Since they were the closest when it happened, the three girls are blamed and told to clean it up. However, after they're working for a while, Orihime sees the hollow and realizes they need to get out of there. So they start to leave, but they aren't fast enough, and a horrifying hollow comes into the open. This is probably one of the creepier hollows. This whole fight sequence really gave me the ick as far as just this particular hollow's ability.
Yeah, it's like a horror movie.
Yeah, like body horror particularly. It shoots like these things out of its body that embed itself into whatever it's attacking, and then it gives it like the ability to control, like zombify or kind of control the remote control the body of the thing it's embedded into. It's just very creepy. And Chizuru is taken over. A lot of the students are taken over by this hollow, but Tatsuki steps in to protect Orihime, but eventually she's overwhelmed too. And, so Orihime is pretty much trapped. And at this moment, she kind of finds the inner resolve to protect Tatsuki. And weirdly, this is strange, but like 2 hairpins given to her by her brother transform into, I'm going to butcher this, but Shun Rika? Am I right on that?
I mean, your guess is mine.
Okay. So these are called 6 princess shielding flowers. They're like little fairies that are controlled by Orihime. She didn't know about these, but they explain that they're a manifestation of her power, and probably been called forth by Ichigo because he's kind of infecting everyone around them with spiritual power, it seems like. So they have the ability, and I liked this, to reject phenomena, meaning that they're able to shield. They're like shields. And Orihime uses them to defeat the hollow, then heal Tatsuki and the others. before she kind of succumbs. I thought this is a great sequence. Like I said, it's icky, it's creepy, one of the more like disturbing ones, I think, in the book.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's just some shots and I'm like, that is disturbing. But what I like about this, and I think this is again one of the strengths of this volume, is that it's not like as Chad and Orihime grow in their power, like they both get swords and all of a sudden they're like great swordsmiths or something like that, or they can both like shoot energy bolts out of their eyes or something, or they have powers that kind of manifest that are very in keeping with who they are as characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is, Chad's right arm is an amplification of his natural strength that is, now supernaturally able to defeat these monsters. Whereas Orihime is fully defensive, right? She's not someone who would ever like attack, but her whole power is like a shield, right? That does end up having some attack ability, but really it's totally defensive, which is again very in keeping with her character. She's very nurturing, she's protective, she's loving, so both of these are where it's not just these people need to level up so they eat a mushroom and they grow, or something like that. It's they're growing in ways that are very consistent and with who they are as people. So nicely done.
I think Kubo is able to integrate characters' powers in with their personalities and personal histories really, really effectively in really believable ways. And this is true also as the world gets bigger, right? It's not just the main cast. Also, like a lot of the Soul Reapers, particularly, who will have these really distinct power sets, even though they are all kind of developed out of the sort of Zanpakuto, the sword. But yeah, just that the way that he kind of harnesses his creativity with kind of action and fighting within the context of characters. I mean, I'm sure there is something else like it, but I've never read a series that does this so effectively. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see the challenge with this. I mean, even with something as beloved as Star Wars, let's use that as an example of something kind of
well known,
Eastern adjacent. Yeah. It's kind of like the Jedis are all pretty similar in how they have their powers, right? You get a lightsaber, you throw stuff around, and if you're a bad guy, you shoot lightning out of your hands.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of variety into how they level up, from what I've seen, and so it's harder than you would think. I think to come up with creative ways to fight that are kind of consistent with the rules you've laid down about how your world works. So yeah, well done.
I like the design of the six sort of, we'll just call them fairies. I know she says they're not fairies, but sort of fairies. They have these very distinct personalities, even though they're kind of background characters. Like they don't, they recur throughout the whole series, but they are not really called a lot of attention to. Yeah, but they really sort of work. I also like the connection with her relationship, not just with Ichigo, but also with her late brother and with Tatsuki, because there is this, on mine it's page 160, but there's this sort of series of flashbacks over the course of a couple pages where, her brother, who took her away from these abusive parents, protected her, provided for her, complimented her hair, saying that she had really beautiful hair. And, Orihime said that, really made her feel good, and she'd grown it out since she was a baby. But in junior high, a ninth grader, again, this sort of prejudice against redheads, basically. A ninth grader said, "I don't like the color of your hair," and took scissors to it, and she cut the rest to match.
Yeah.
And she sort of, she couldn't tell her brother the truth and said she just cut it because she wanted to. And really soon after that, he died. She was left alone. She became sort of lonelier and lonelier. But then the person who sort of reached out to her and pulled her out of herself was Tatsuki. And she then sort of grew her hair out again, and she says she thinks to herself sort of that her long hair symbolizes her trust in Tatsuki. And I really like that.
Yeah.
There's I think Kubo, it tends to be in the background, but Kubo is really good at depicting friendship. I mean, there is the sort of I don't know. There's the kind of stereotypical meme joke about not just animes, but particularly animes, sort of aimed at kids of sort of being saved by the power of friendship and everything. I think Kubo is actually really good at depicting these friendships. Right? You think of Ichigo and Chad, or of Orihime and Tatsuki, or also like Rukia and Ichigo.
Yeah.
And then some friendships sort of eventually, no spoilers, but do blossom into something more romantic. But a lot are just these very deep friendships that, I don't know, it's just rare to have depicted kind of honestly in media generally. I really appreciate it because I think particularly we live in a time where there is such a dearth of friendship. There's all these statistics, right? That like it's especially acute for men. I forget the exact numbers, but there's this poll about the number of close friends people have, not counting romantic partners or family members. And when they started taking it in, I want to say the 60s, maybe early 70s, the average man had something like 5-ish close friends, which great. That seems very solid. Now the average man has something like 1.2.
Wow.
Which means a ton of guys have 0 close friends.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I really like just the depiction of friendship throughout. And the friendship between Orihime and Tatsuki is really good. And I really like the kind of the way, Kubo in between the chapters will draw these sort of little sketchy illustrations of things. And when Tatsuki sort of comes to her rescue, there's this image of dragon protecting a princess who looks kind of like Orihime, and Hime I think means princess. And
yeah,
then,
I think it does.
After Tatsuki falls, you then get a little image of the dragon fallen on the ground and the princess going to protect the dragon. And this sort of series of chapters is called, Princess and Dragon, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. I really like that. I think that's just so well done.
Huh. Yeah, I never noticed that little illustration. I mean, there's so much packed into these that
he does. He has a lot of little extras.
Yeah, little doodles. Yeah, which I love. I love when comics do that, but I definitely missed those or didn't pay attention to it.
Yeah. All right, so on to volume 6. So in volume 6, we get the real kind of this is sort of the end of the contest between Ichigo and Uryu. So basically, I mean, a lot happens, but to kind of simplify, Kisuke Urahara, the sort of hat and clogs, who is the kind of secretive figure who's been helping Rukia in various ways, providing her with things. He sort of rescues Orihime and Chad and starts to explain their powers to them. Sorry, can we pause for just a second? My 3-year-old is by the door and upset. I'll be right back.
No problem.
Hi, mind turning on your camera? Jack wants to say hi. He's wearing the headphones, so he can hear you, but I can't.
Hi, Jack. How you doing?
Good.
Yeah, you want to say hi?
I heard some exciting news that you're going to be a big brother again. Are you excited about that?
Yes.
Exciting.
Yeah?
Fine.
All right, so Daddy's almost done. Okay?
Okay.
So can you say bye-bye to Mr. Levi, and then I'll finish in about 15, 20 minutes. I'll be out.
Bye-bye, Jack.
Alley-oop. No. Well, for just a second, okay? Sorry about that. His little brother woke him up very, very early in his nap, so he's a bit clingy. All right. Okay,
it's okay.
So Kisuke explains basically that their abilities were awakened by Ichigo. He also says that they weren't kind of completely caused by him, right? There was some underlying abilities or something to their beings or minds. It's a little murky. So we get to the sort of main fight. Uryu is kind of shocked by just how many hollows are coming through because of the bait that he that he released, and his finger, his fingers are starting to bleed. He and Ichigo have this lengthy confrontation where Uryu is sort of expressing his detestation of Soul Reapers. And Ichigo says, like, look, I don't care about that. I've been a Soul Reaper for a few months. I don't really even know anything about these guys. I just do it to, like, protect people. This is not, like, a massive cosmic battle. This is, like, you and me trying to stay alive at this point. I don't like you.
Right.
I'm not going to forgive you for having released this bait, but we need to fight together.
Right.
To be able, he actually says, like, so that we can have a fight again later. The Hollows. So at this point, we start to learn a bit about the history. So the Quincy's were all but eradicated by the Soul Reapers a few centuries ago. And it was because the Soul Reapers and the Hollows had sort of fundamentally different philosophies about how to deal with Hollows. The Soul Reapers, as we know, cleanse Hollows, right? So they actually are effectively shriving them of their sins. They're forgiving their sins and letting them pass on to the Soul Society. The arrows of the Quincy's just destroy Hollows. They kill them. And in the sort of balance of the universe, there needs to be the right kind of combination of souls alive and dead at any time. And all of reality would have been destroyed had the Quincy's continued to multiply.
Right.
And so they eventually killed all the Quincy's. We're then sort of introduced a bit more to Ryu's personal backstory, but I guess here's probably a good kind of place to pause. So how do you like this kind of beginning of the sort of world building with the Quincy's and the Soul Reapers and their sort of distinction?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the Soul Reapers are an interesting group. I think when I started this, I just kind of assumed they were good, unambiguously the good guys. And
yeah,
we've been talking a lot about, kind of moral clarity in this book. But as you go, you're kind of more like they're pretty gray in a lot of ways in their behavior. And, so I think when I first read this, I just assumed, okay, well, I should probably side with the Soul Reapers because our hero Ichigo is a Soul Reaper. But now I think, it's very likely that the Soul Reapers just did something really atrocious.
Yeah, I mean, it is genocide, right? Basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I don't know. This is a, and I assume it's because, I'm a Christian, been raised in the West to some degree, but I've always kind of felt, I mean, how many, ever since I heard bring balance to the Force, I've always kind of been like, okay, what? that the point is not to eliminate evil. The point is to just balance it out. It's dualism. It's very Eastern. But in practice, I'm kind of on the Quincy. That's if maybe not. Maybe if they're actually sending these souls, annihilating these souls, as we discussed, maybe that's not so good. Maybe these souls do need to go to heaven or hell. But nevertheless, I always get a little bit okay, when someone's talking about we need to keep the balance, as if balance is the end goal of existence.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, I mean, philosophy is notoriously, let's say, various, right? There are many disagreements throughout history, both Western and Eastern, about kind of the nature of reality, and particularly as you get to more metaphysical questions, there's more disagreement.
Right.
My boy St. Thomas Aquinas says that there are many things that are achievable by reason, right? So you can know by reason alone. There's obvious things, right? You can know that murder of innocence is wrong. You can know that theft is wrong. You can know that dishonesty is wrong, right? But even sort of more complicated or seemingly sort of very debatable claims he thinks can be reached by reason alone. So, for instance, the existence of a singular creator God, he thinks can be known by reason. He doesn't think you can know the existence of the Trinity by reason, but the existence of God, and even some pretty sort of thorny moral questions he thinks can be understood by reason alone, but that sort of due to the impacts of sin and what it does to our intellects and the kind of way that it also corrupts our societies and then by extension corrupts our own kind of intellectual and moral formation, it's really difficult, right? So like you can tell by reason alone that chattel slavery is wrong, but in the South, the sort of wealthy white people, slave owners in the 1800s, like a lot of them did not figure that out. And they actually often were Christian, usually were, right? So like sin impacts these things pretty badly.
Right. We're not morally neutral, and so we have motivated reasoning.
Yeah,
is the problem.
Absolutely. And I think, right, like I think like metaphysics is such a difficult branch of thought that I can I can understand getting to some of these conclusions, right? Because because it's sort of obvious that there are aspects of our lives where balance is key, right? Like you need to sleep enough and you need to be awake enough, right? Like you need to exercise enough, you need to, all these sorts of things, right? And even within like the moral life, right? Like Aristotle talks about the natural virtues being the mean between two extremes. Courage is not being totally terrified of everything and never doing anything, but it's also not just throwing yourself into everything all the time. It's somewhere in the middle, right? So like there is something to these ideas of balance and moderation, but when you sort of elevate it into a whole metaphysical system, to me it tends to end up nihilistic is the wrong term. That's too strong, but at least not very motivating. Like, when I think about the kind of and I mean, maybe we shouldn't talk about this sort of too much because we aren't, at the actual Soul Society arc. But like, does the Soul Society sound better than hell? Yes. Does it sound 1/1,000,000th as good, even if you're well off in the Soul Society? Does it sound 1/1,000,000th of the sort of promise of Christian salvation of eternal, perfect happiness, gazing on the face of the God who is triune love within the whole communion of all those who are in heaven? Like, no.
Right.
Yeah. Like, so part of it might just be I have kind of high standards for these things given my theological commitments, but yeah.
No, I think you're onto something. I think as we go in this, that is one of the nagging things. It's not really a criticism because I don't expect it to be a, like a Christian metaphysics or anything like that. But it is one of the things where I just keep on going like, what the heck is going on in the Soul Society? Like, and it's not a major part of the plot that at least I've read so far, but I'm just like, and this is actually often with, I'd say, kind of Japanese, manga and anime. It has a really strong moral core often to me, which is great. But then the metaphysics are super weird as far as, there's often like hell around, but there's not a real strong sense of heaven, so the metaphysical universe at the very least is confused. And, I mean, maybe given the history of like Japan, maybe that's not totally surprising, but it's not very satisfying as opposed to, gosh, I mean, like, if you want to get, really go for it, like something that like a C.S. Lewis or a Tolkien could put together, as far as just, a metaphysical universe that is deeply satisfying. And beautiful.
And I do think that is sort of a broader issue I have with a lot of the more, let's say, spiritually oriented manga, those that sort of use the ideas of like souls, the afterlife, anything of this sort, ghosts. There can be this, I don't know, it's just this sort of nagging feeling that like what they're working for ultimately isn't that great, even though the kind of like basic notions of the virtues are correct broadly, right? Like even though there is so much to it morally, but when it gets to the deeper like account of the person and of our ultimate purpose, there's just so much missing there, right? And with a lot of mangas, right, it doesn't come into play, right? Like, I mean, I haven't read all of One Piece, but like most of One Piece is just like go on exciting pirate adventures, or one of my favorites, Gintama. It's like it's just all these ridiculous like adventures in in like 1800s or 1700s, 1600s. I forget when sort of modernization of Japan was, but with aliens and stuff, or Ranma one half. It's just like a
Yeah.
dude who turns into a chick when water is poured on him. Like it's just but with a lot of the more sort of spiritually oriented mangas, I do often have this kind of hesitation about it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Even I think I don't know. I think I agree with you. I think it's even with an adventure, you think of something like the King Arthur mythology, right? And part of I think of the appeal is it gives you a taste of kind of that medieval worldview to some degree,
yeah,
where there's such a sense of heaven above you in that, and where you are in the universe
yeah, the great
and
chain of
your
being. Yeah,
obligations.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. That I think that's even if we couldn't articulate that, I think that's part of its enduring appeal.
yeah,
Is like what you love in Arthur is what like is that understanding in a lot of ways, and why the yeah. So I think that to me, you can put that into adventures. It can you could have a One
yeah,
Piece with a beautiful chain of being or something.
yeah, yeah.
So I think that is maybe one criticism of this.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I agree, yeah. And I think particularly in later arcs, as we, very minor spoilers for 5 seconds, get more into Quincy's, and they're sort of more of a part of the plot. There is some kind of like, and then also with like, let's say the higher hierarchy above the Soul Society, it's like seems kind of terrible to me, and that's just sort of part of the story that has to be reckoned with to a certain extent. All right, so continuing on, we get to know Uryu a little bit better by seeing, again, flashback to him with his master, basically sort of his sensei, for lack of a better term, who taught him to harness his Quincy powers. And Uryu's asking him about the story of when the Soul Reapers destroyed all the Quincy's. And he asks, you never really explained whether the Soul Reapers were wrong. And he said, that's not the point. The Quincy's were wrong for failing to heed the warnings that the Soul Reapers gave to them. And Uryu objects. And he says, yeah, but his master says that our people died, and after that it mattered little who was right or wrong. What we had to think about was how to make sure that nothing like this ever happened again. And he says, seeing the sad faces of humans or soul reapers pains me. So we get the sense that the man who trained Uryu was deeply humane. And his desire was basically that Quincy's would be allowed to kind of repopulate and use their powers, but in conjunction with the soul reapers, so sort of be on the ground, right? So like when a hollow shows up, if the Soul Society, right, the Soul Reapers can't always get there quickly, right? And so in a lot of situations, it would save lives for Quincy's to be there to kind of protect the Earth, but they'd be working sort of alongside the Soul Reapers, which sounds like a relatively compelling vision. But again, like Ichigo is just kind of like, I really don't care about all this stuff. Like, we just have to kill all these hollows and get out of here alive. So then they start fighting back to back, but then this massive hollow, like the size of, a skyscraper, shows up called a Menos Grande that that's sort of like lots of hollows smushed together basically, and it like eats other hollows. And there's this lengthy sort of battle against it as Ichigo tries various things that don't work. And Uryu realizes just how sort of spiritually powerful Ichigo is. And there's this great sort of image where it explains how Soul Reapers materialize their spirit energy from their own souls into a Zanpakuto sword. So they use this power from within, whereas Quincy's gather ambient spiritual power into their bows to be able to shoot these arrows. And Uryu realizes that Ichigo has just an astonishing level of spiritual power that's just sort of constantly pouring out of him. Ichigo ends up absorbing this massive attack from the Menos Grande Hollow and reflecting it back at him, destroying, or not destroying, sorry, but like basically terrifying the Hollow, and he like crawls back into Waco Mundo. But despite winning, Uryu realizes Ichigo's spiritual energy is massively unstable now, and he could die, and he's just pouring out spiritual energy. So Uryu starts absorbing the spiritual energy that Ichigo is giving off and shooting arrows into the air to basically save his life. And Ichigo's like, what are you doing? Like, your hands are bleeding, stop. This doesn't, like, and Uryu is like, shut up. I'm keeping you alive, and I want to beat you in a fight. And Uryu has this sort of realization that he's been seeking to avenge his master, and his master would never want to be avenged because his master's dream was for a more peaceful world, and a more peaceful relationship between Quincy's and Soul Reapers. So that was a heck of a lot. I don't know what stuck out at you here.
I don't actually have a ton to add to this thing. I will just say there's a couple things that I love. The Menos Grande design, it's hard to be, I think, impressed at this point by a new character design. But when I first read this, I was like, ooh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
There's something just, whereas a lot of these monsters are just more complicated, strange things, this massive creature in something that is almost comical. It's almost clownish what he's wearing. Yeah. This mask that has like this pointed nose. It's like something out of Tintin and the Picaros or something. But it's so creepy. The way it enters the scene and the way it just has this sense of scale to it. Yeah. That is really great. So I loved this introduction of a character, and it gives you just enough to kind of, you go, oh, whoa, there's like a way bigger universe out there than just the hollows they've been like cutting up here and on Earth. It's actually much bigger, and it does it so well. So loved that. And then I loved the way Ichigo handles him. It's really hilarious where he's like, what was your plan? He's like, well, I was just going to cut him up until I got to the head, and
like Django.
You're like, that's not going to work. He goes, did you eat paint chips as a child? It's it's fun. So yeah, I don't have a ton to add other than it's a good, like I said, this is kind of a transitional volume, and this is where I really think it starts to open up into this much bigger world, with kind of a much larger cast of characters and really monsters, on a different scale.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really like the depiction of Uryu's master. It's striking. It had not really occurred to me before the extent to which the main characters of Bleach are all so indebted, for better and worse, to their parents and teachers.
Yeah.
Right. Or forebears generally, right? That like Ichigo is so formed by his mother and his mother's love and his experience of that and of losing her and of being powerless to help. Orihime of her sort of abusive parents, and then her deeply kind and good older brother. Chad, his grandfather, Uryu, of his master, and then we'll sort of later come to realize, others as well. Yeah, and that's just it's striking to me because it's handled so well, right? And it's also very often handled briefly, right? Like,
right.
With Chad and Orihime, like, they're only, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages of this, but it informs their character for, 74 volumes. And with Uryu, it is like, because he does, over the course of the whole series, he does sort of still struggle with some of these resentments, right? Even though he does have a breakthrough here and he like works with Ichigo later, there are still these lingering hesitations that make sense given his experience with his master, and then also with like particularly his father. I just think they're characters, like, these are characters that really stick with me.
Yeah.
Like Kubo has a much like more subtle and just lighter touch with these things than one would expect from big explosive fighting manga, basically. And I think the reason why these volumes have always stuck out at me, I think, is just the way that it really makes readers sort of fall in love with these characters as full human beings who then are, going to go on to be in all these different conflicts, but consistently, especially in the Soul Society arc, but also at various times later, the conflicts they get in make sense on a kind of deep level with their own deepest motivations.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that. So that'd be kind of my closing thought on these volumes, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. I don't have much to add.
All right, so next week will be finally, after like a month or so, we would be starting on the Smithsonian collection of newspaper comics and looking at a bunch
teasing
of
this for a while.
The sort of earliest American newspaper comics, first few decades, particularly the Sunday strips, which I'm really excited for. That's all we have for the episode. So if you enjoyed this episode of Truth Beauty Comics, there are 3 things you can do for the podcast to support it. The first is just to keep listening and to tell your friends about it.
The second is to review the podcast, giving it 5 stars whenever you listen to us.
And the last thing you can do is to consider contributing to our Patreon with a monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can get perks like access to exclusive episodes, voting on upcoming episode topics, and even an original drawing from Levi. But most of all, you can help make this podcast sustainable.
That's the end of the episode. You can reach us at truthbeautycomics@gmail.com or on our social media accounts. Thanks for listening. Remember to take comics seriously and have fun while doing it.